Tuesday mornings used to be my favorite. David would leave early for his commute to downtown Chicago, and I'd have the house to myself with my coffee and the morning light streaming through our kitchen windows. That particular Tuesday in October started no differently. I was still in my robe when his phone buzzed on the counter. He'd forgotten it again, rushing out the door like he always did. The message preview lit up the screen before I could look away. Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again, baby. The sender was listed as Emma, Yoga Studio. My hands went cold. Emma taught at the studio where David had suddenly become so dedicated to his wellness journey 3 months ago. The same Emma he'd mentioned casually over dinner, praising her amazing technique and personal attention. I stared at that phone like it was a snake coiled on my granite countertop. I should have put it down. Should have respected his privacy. Should have found a way to convince myself there was an innocent explanation. Instead, I picked it up. His passcode was our wedding anniversary. How's that for irony? The messages loaded, and my entire world shifted off its axis. Months of conversations. Plans made around my schedule. Hotel receipts. Photos I never should have seen. They'd been together since July, maybe longer. While I was planning our 10th anniversary dinner, he was planning secret getaways to Milwaukee. While I was picking out curtains for the guest room we'd finally decided to convert into his home office, he was picking out lingerie for her. The betrayal wasn't just in the act. It was in the details. He'd used our joint credit card. He'd told her about our private conversations, our struggles with fertility, my fears about my mother's recent diagnosis. He'd shared pieces of me, of us, with someone who was actively helping him destroy our marriage. I sat on our kitchen floor in my bathrobe, scrolling through evidence of a double life I'd never suspected. David, who left me love notes in my lunch bag. David, who still opened car doors for me and remembered to buy the expensive coffee I liked. David, who'd held me last weekend while I cried about another negative pregnancy test, was the same David who'd been texting another woman that he couldn't wait to start fresh with her. The worst part wasn't even the cheating. It was reading him tell Emma that he felt trapped and suffocated by our life together, that he'd outgrown our relationship, but didn't know how to end it, that I was sweet but naive and would never understand what he really needed. Seeing myself reduced to an obstacle in his path to happiness, that cut deeper than any physical betrayal could have. When I heard his car in the driveway 20 minutes later, I was still sitting there. He'd realized he'd forgotten his phone and come back for it. The garage door rumbled open, and I listened to his footsteps crossing the kitchen threshold. He found me exactly where the evidence of his deception had brought me down. "Sarah? What's wrong?" His voice carried that particular concern he used when he thought I was having one of my emotional moments. The same tone he'd probably described to Emma when explaining why his wife was so difficult to deal with. I held up his phone. The screen was still open to their conversation. I watched the color drain from his face, watched him search for words that didn't exist. There's no explanation for months of calculated lies. No justification for the systematic dismantling of a person's reality. "How long?" I asked, though I already knew. He sat down across from me on the kitchen floor, still in his work clothes, and for the first time in our 10-year relationship, David was completely, utterly speechless. We stayed on that kitchen floor for what felt like hours. David tried everything. Tears, anger, promises, even blame. He said Emma meant nothing, that it was just physical, that he'd been confused and stupid, but loved only me. Then, when that didn't work, he accused me of violating his privacy, of being controlling and paranoid. The lies came so easily, I wondered how many times he'd practiced them. But something strange was happening to me during his desperate performance. Instead of the crushing heartbreak I'd expected, I felt an odd sense of clarity. Sitting there, listening to him scramble for explanations that would let him keep both his wife and his girlfriend, I realized this moment had been coming for longer than either of us had admitted. "Stop," I said quietly. And he did. "Just stop talking." I stood up, my legs shaky from sitting on cold tile, and walked to the coffee maker. My hands moved automatically, grinding beans, measuring water, pressing buttons. Normal motions in a moment that was anything but normal. David watched me like I might explode or disappear. "Are you in love with her?" I asked without turning around. The silence stretched so long I could hear the coffee beginning to brew. When he finally answered, his voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know." I laughed then, a sound that surprised us both. "You don't know. After 4 months of hotel rooms and secret phone calls, you don't know if you love her. Sarah, please." "No." I turned to face him. "You know what I realized while you were performing your little breakdown? I haven't been happy either, not for a long time." That stopped him cold. He'd built his entire justification around the idea that he was the only one suffering in our marriage, that I was blissfully content while he withered away in domestic prison. "I've been sleepwalking through our life together," I continued, "pretending not to notice how you flinch when I touch you. Ignoring how you've stopped asking about my day, stopped caring about my thoughts on anything that matters. I've been so busy trying to be the perfect wife that I forgot to ask myself if I wanted to be married to you at all." The coffee finished brewing with a final hiss. I poured myself a cup, not offering him any. It felt like the first honest thing I'd done in months. "I read what you told her about me," I said, "about feeling trapped. And you know what? You're right. You are trapped, but not by me. You're trapped by your own cowardice. You're too afraid to end something that's been dead for years, so instead you decided to slowly poison it." David's face crumpled. "I never meant for this to happen. But it did happen. And now I know exactly who you are when you think no one's watching." I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the bitter heat. "I know you're capable of looking me in the eye every single day while planning your escape route. I know you can hold me while I cry, and then text another woman an hour later. I know you can share my vulnerabilities, my private struggles, with someone whose goal is to replace me." He started to speak, but I held up my hand. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You're going to pack a bag and leave today. You're going to stay at your brother's or a hotel or with Emma. I don't care where. But you're not sleeping in our bed tonight. Sarah, we can work through this. Counseling, therapy, whatever you want. I want you to leave." The words came out calm and final. "Not because I'm angry, though I am. Not because I want to punish you, though you deserve it. But because I deserve better than being someone's safety net while they figure out what they really want." I walked past him toward the stairs, then paused. "And David, when you're living your new life with Emma, when you're telling people how suffocated you felt in our marriage, remember this. I'm the one who set you free. I'm the one with enough courage to end what you couldn't." The sound of his sobbing followed me upstairs, but I didn't turn back. I had a lawyer to call. The house felt different without him in it. Not empty, liberated. For the first time in years, I could walk through my own home without unconsciously adjusting my behavior to accommodate someone else's mood. I didn't have to worry about the volume of my phone calls or apologize for leaving coffee rings on the furniture. David had packed quickly that first day, taking only essentials and promising to come back for the rest when we figured things out. I told him he had 2 weeks to collect everything or I'd donate it all. He looked shocked, like he still believed this was a temporary tantrum he could wait out. My sister Janet drove down from Milwaukee the day after he left. I hadn't called her. Somehow she just knew, the way sisters do. She took one look at me and said, "You look better already." I hadn't even realized it was true until she said it. "I feel like I should be falling apart," I told her over dinner. We'd ordered Thai food and were eating it straight from the containers in my living room. Something David always said was uncivilized. "Why?" Janet asked, twirling pad thai around her chopsticks. "Because society tells you that's how divorced women are supposed to behave. Because your cheating husband deserves your tears?" I thought about that. I loved him. Past tense, she pointed out. And loving someone doesn't mean you have to destroy yourself when they betray you. Janet stayed for a week, helping me navigate the initial legal consultations and practical details of separation. She also helped me do something I hadn't expected. I started making decisions based purely on what I wanted. We painted the bedroom a soft lavender, a color David had always vetoed as too feminine. We moved furniture around until the living room felt like mine instead of ours. I bought groceries without considering his preferences for the first time in a decade. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness, though the silence took some getting used to. It was facing the reaction from our social circle. Some friends immediately chose sides. David's golf buddies stopped returning my calls, While my book club rallied around me with casseroles and righteous indignation, others tried to play peacemaker, suggesting counseling and reconciliation, as if betrayal was just a communication problem that could be solved with the right therapeutic technique. "What if you're making a mistake?" my mother asked during one of our phone calls. "Marriage is work, Sarah. It takes compromise. It also takes honesty," I replied, "and respect, and basic human decency." She went quiet for a moment. "Your father and I went through rough patches too. Did Dad spend months sleeping with another woman while telling her our private business and planning his escape route?" Another pause. "Well, no. Then it's not the same thing, Mom." The calls from David started 3 days after he left. First apologetic, then angry, then desperate. He wanted to meet for coffee, to talk things through, to explain himself better. He insisted Emma was out of the picture, that he'd ended things and wanted only to repair our marriage. When I didn't respond to his calls, he started showing up at places he knew I'd be. The grocery store, my yoga studio, even my office parking lot. "I made a mistake," he said during one particularly pathetic ambush outside Target. "I was having some kind of midlife crisis. It had nothing to do with you. That's exactly the problem," I told him, not slowing my pace toward the entrance. "It should have had everything to do with me. If you were unhappy in our marriage, you should have talked to me, gone to counseling, or left honorably. Instead, you chose to sneak around and make me look like a fool while you figured out your feelings. But I choose you now," he said, desperation making his voice crack. "I choose us." I stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "You don't get to choose me after choosing someone else for 4 months. You don't get to treat me like a backup plan and then act surprised when I refuse to participate." That was when I realized something important. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt or confused or heartbroken. I was simply done. Done with explaining myself, done with considering his feelings, done with carrying the emotional weight of his poor decisions. 2 weeks after he left, I changed the locks. I also changed my phone number, my email password, and the beneficiary on my life insurance policy. Small acts of independence that felt like revolutionary declarations. For the first time in my adult life, I belonged completely to myself. David's lawyer was everything I'd expected. Expensive suit, condescending smile, and a strategy clearly designed to paint me as an unstable woman having an emotional breakdown. During our first mediation session, they tried to argue that I'd abandoned the marriage by changing the locks, that my erratic behavior proved I wasn't thinking clearly. I sat across from them in that sterile conference room, watching David avoid eye contact while his attorney painted me as the villain in our story. It was almost laughable. The man who'd spent 4 months lying to my face was now claiming I was the unreasonable one. "Mrs. Patterson," his lawyer said, shuffling through papers with theatrical importance, "my client is willing to forgive your recent actions and work toward reconciliation. He's prepared to attend counseling and make whatever changes necessary to repair your marriage." I looked at David then, really looked at him. He'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Part of me, a very small part, felt sorry for him, but mostly I felt nothing at all. "Mr. Davidson," I said to his lawyer, "your client seems to have misunderstood the purpose of this meeting. We're here to discuss the terms of our divorce, not to negotiate the continuation of a marriage that ended the moment he decided to share our bed with someone else." My own attorney, Carol Hendricks, smiled slightly. Carol was nothing like David's flashy lawyer. She was in her 50s, wore sensible shoes, and had a reputation for being ruthless when protecting her female clients. I'd chosen her specifically because she specialized in cases where men tried to manipulate the system. "Furthermore," I continued, "I'd like to address this claim about abandonment. I didn't abandon our marriage. I simply stopped participating in a charade. I refuse to pretend that discovering months of infidelity is somehow my fault or my responsibility to fix." David finally spoke up. "Sarah, I've told you Emma meant nothing. It was a mistake." "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk," I interrupted. "A mistake is double booking dinner plans. What you did was make a series of calculated choices over 4 months. You chose to lie to me every day. You chose to spend our money on hotels with her. You chose to share intimate details of our life, our struggles, our private moments with someone whose goal was to replace me." His face flushed red. You're being dramatic. Am I? Let me read you something. I pulled out my phone and opened the screenshots I'd taken of his messages. This is what you told Emma about the night I cried over another negative pregnancy test. Sarah was having another meltdown about kids tonight. Sometimes I think she's more in love with the idea of being a mother than actually being married to me. I can't wait until we can just be together without all this baggage. The room went completely silent. Carol's eyebrows shot up, and even David's lawyer looked uncomfortable. David himself had gone pale. You turned my pain into entertainment for your girlfriend, I said quietly. You made my most vulnerable moments into proof that I was the problem in our marriage. So no, I don't think I'm being dramatic. I think I'm being remarkably restrained. After that, the tone of the meeting shifted entirely. David's lawyer stopped talking about reconciliation and started focusing on asset division. They wanted the house, half my retirement account, and alimony. David had apparently become accustomed to a certain lifestyle during our marriage and shouldn't have to sacrifice his comfort because of his temporary lapse in judgment. I almost laughed out loud at that one. David made good money as a marketing director, but I made more as a senior software engineer. I'd been the primary breadwinner for the last 3 years, something his pride had never quite adjusted to. Now he wanted me to continue supporting him after he'd betrayed me. Counteroffer, Carol said smoothly. My client keeps the house, which she purchased before the marriage with her own down payment. She keeps her full retirement account, which she's contributed to longer than the marriage has existed. Mr. Patterson can keep his own accounts and assets, and there will be no alimony from either party. That's completely unreasonable, David's lawyer sputtered. My client gave up opportunities to support their joint lifestyle. Your client gave up opportunities to cheat on his wife more efficiently, Carol replied dryly. But that's not my client's problem to solve financially. The mediation ended with nothing resolved, but I felt victorious anyway. For the first time in months, I'd spoken my truth without apologizing for it. I'd refused to minimize David's actions or take responsibility for his choices. I'd stood up for myself in a way that felt both foreign and absolutely right. Walking out of that building, I realized something had shifted inside me. I wasn't just ending my marriage. I was discovering who I was when I stopped trying to be who someone else needed me to be. 3 months into living alone, I did something I hadn't done in years. I signed up for a pottery class. It sounds trivial, but it represented something huge for me. David had always dismissed my creative interests as hobbies that took time away from more important things. His things, our social obligations, the endless maintenance of a life that had never quite felt like mine. The studio was in an old converted warehouse in Lincoln Park, filled with mismatched tables and the earthy smell of clay. My instructor was a woman named Maya, probably in her 40s, with paint-stained fingers and the kind of confidence I envied. She didn't ask why I was there or what I hoped to accomplish. She just put a lump of clay in front of me and said, "Let's see what happens." What happened was magic. My hands remembered something my mind had forgotten. The pure joy of creating something from nothing. The first few pieces were disasters, lopsided bowls and wobbly vases that made Maya laugh in the most encouraging way. But I didn't care. For 2 hours every Thursday evening, I existed in a space where David had never been, where his opinions and preferences had no power. The other students were an eclectic mix: a retired teacher, a young man going through his own divorce, 2 college friends looking for something to do together. Nobody asked intrusive questions about my personal life, but somehow I found myself opening up anyway. When Tom, the other divorcee, mentioned how strange it felt to grocery shop for one person, I actually laughed. I bought an entire chocolate cake last week, I admitted, just because I could. David hated chocolate. What kind of monster hates chocolate? Asked Lisa, one of the college friends. The kind who hates a lot of things, I said, and realized it was true. David's list of dislikes had slowly become the boundaries of my world. No chocolate, no loud music, no spontaneous plans, no friends he found annoying. I'd been shrinking myself for so long I'd forgotten what my actual size was. That night, I went home and made a list. Not of goals or resolutions, but of things I'd stopped doing because David didn't like them. The list was longer than I'd expected. Dancing, singing in the car, buying books I'd never read, staying up late to watch old movies, eating breakfast for dinner, talking to strangers in coffee shops. I started working through that list with the determination of someone making up for lost time. I joined a salsa dancing class, where I was terrible but enthusiastic. I bought a keyboard and relearned songs I'd played in college. I started going to jazz clubs downtown, something David had always refused to do because he found jazz pretentious and boring. At one of those clubs, I met Elena, a graphic designer who became my first real friend in years. She was everything David would have hated: loud, opinionated, politically active, and completely uninterested in making herself smaller for anyone's comfort. We bonded over shared frustration with men who couldn't handle women who knew what they wanted. "You know what I love about you?" Elena said one night over drinks at a wine bar in Wicker Park. "You're not bitter. Most women going through what you're dealing with would be consumed with rage." I considered that. I was angry at first. Furious, actually. But then I realized something. Staying angry would be like letting David continue to control my emotional state. He doesn't deserve that kind of power over me anymore. Elena raised her glass. "To taking your power back. To never giving it away again," I countered. The divorce proceedings dragged on, but I found I cared less about the outcome as time passed. David could fight for whatever he wanted. I was building a life he couldn't touch. I redecorated the house, not to erase him, but to reflect who I was becoming. I planted a garden, adopted a rescue dog named Stella, and started hosting dinner parties for my new friends. The most surprising discovery was how much I enjoyed my own company. Saturday mornings became sacred. Coffee in bed, farmers market visits, long walks with Stella through Lincoln Park. I read entire books in single sittings, watched foreign films with subtitles, and learned to cook dishes that pleased only me. One evening, while working on a particularly challenging piece at the pottery studio, Maya asked me what had changed. I looked up from the clay I was centering on the wheel, my hands steady and sure. "I stopped apologizing for taking up space," I said. "I stopped making myself smaller to make someone else comfortable. I remembered that I actually like who I am when I'm not trying to be someone else." Maya smiled and nodded toward my piece, a strong, elegant vase that stood perfectly balanced. "It shows," she said, "in your work and in you." That night, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and saw someone I barely recognized. Not because I looked different, but because I looked like myself again. The woman staring back at me had opinions, desires, dreams, and the courage to pursue them. She looked like someone who could handle whatever came next. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in March, exactly 6 months after I'd found those messages. I walked out of the courthouse with Carol, feeling strangely anticlimactic. All those months of legal battles, mediation sessions, and paperwork had led to this, a judge's signature making official what had been true since that October morning. David had finally accepted the settlement terms after his lawyer advised him that continuing to fight would only cost him more money with little chance of success. I kept the house, my retirement accounts, and my dignity. He kept his assets and his freedom to pursue whatever happiness he thought Emma could provide. "How do you feel?" Carol asked as we stood on the courthouse steps. "Free," I said, and meant it completely. That evening, I was in my garden planting spring bulbs when David's car pulled into the driveway. I'd been expecting this, some final attempt at closure or reconciliation now that the legal proceedings were over. Stella barked once from her spot on the porch, then settled back down. Even my dog had moved on. David looked older, thinner, with an uncertainty in his posture I'd never seen before. He stood at the edge of my garden like he was afraid to step onto the property that had once been ours. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I was hoping we could talk." I kept planting, not looking up. "What about?" I wanted to apologize. Really apologize, not the legal version. "I know I hurt you terribly, and I know I handled everything wrong." I sat back on my heels and studied him. There was something different about him, something deflated. "How are things with Emma?" His face crumpled slightly. "That ended months ago. Right after you filed for divorce, actually. She said she couldn't be with someone who was still fighting for his ex-wife. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But you weren't fighting for me, David. You were fighting to avoid the consequences of your choices. I know that now." He stepped closer, and I noticed he was wearing the cologne I'd bought him for Christmas. The Christmas we'd spent opening presents together, planning a future that was already over. I've been going to therapy, individual therapy. Dr. Martinez helped me understand how selfish I was, how I took you for granted. I stood up, brushing dirt from my hands. I'm glad you're getting help, I really am. But I hope you understand that this conversation isn't going to change anything between us. I was hoping, he started, then stopped. God, Sarah, I miss you. I miss us. I miss coming home to you and Stella, and the smell of whatever you were cooking for dinner. I miss talking to you about work and watching you get excited about your projects. I miss being married to my best friend. The words hung in the air between us. A year ago, they would have broken me. 6 months ago, they would have made me angry. Now, they just made me sad for him. David, I said gently, I wasn't your best friend. I was your convenience. A best friend is someone you're honest with, someone you protect, someone whose happiness matters as much as your own. You lied to me for months, shared my private pain with another woman, and planned your escape while I planned our future. That's not friendship. That's not even basic respect. He was crying now, and part of me ached for the man I'd once loved so completely. I know I don't deserve it, but is there any chance you could forgive me? Any possibility we could try again? I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not anger, not love, not even pity. Just a profound sense of closure. I do forgive you, I said, and watched hope flicker in his eyes. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean trusting you again or giving you another chance to hurt me. It means I'm not carrying anger anymore. It means I wish you well, genuinely, but from a distance. Sarah, please. I'm happy, David. Really, truly happy in a way I don't think I was for years before our marriage ended. I have friends who value me for who I am, hobbies that bring me joy, a home that feels like mine. I've remembered who I am when I'm not trying to be what someone else needs. I gestured toward the garden, the house, the life I'd built from the ashes of our relationship. I wouldn't trade any of this for what we had, not even the good parts. He stood there for a long moment, and I could see him finally understanding that this wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't a temporary setback in our love story. This was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said, as he turned to leave. But I hope you find it honestly this time. After his car disappeared down the street, I went back to my bulbs. Tomorrow they would begin pushing through the dark soil toward the light. By summer, they would bloom into something beautiful and entirely their own, just like me.